It is often said that history is written by the victors, but in the world of technology, history is written by the survivors. And usually, the survivors are the ones who are crazy enough to see a future that everyone else called a hallucination. Right now, the tectonic plates of the global economy are shifting. If you listen closely to the hum of the world's data centers, from the massive server farms in Northern Virginia to the secret facilities in the Nevada desert, you are hearing the sound of a monopoly. We're living through a moment that future historians will compare to the Industrial Revolution or the discovery of oil. But this time, the resource isn't black gold, it is silicon intelligence. And the Standard Oil of this new era is a company that for 30 years was dismissed as a toy maker, NVIDIA. Today, their chips are so valuable that they are delivered in armored trucks. CFOs of Fortune 500 companies don't ask, how much do they cost? They ask, how many can we get? Nations are stockpiling them like munitions. The stock chart looks like a glitch, a vertical line that has added trillions of dollars in value, defying every law of financial gravity. But this isn't a story about a stock price, and it isn't a story about overnight success. That is the lie the headlines tell you. The truth is much darker, much more desperate, and infinitely more interesting. This is the story of a 30-year secret war. A war against the central processing unit, a war against Wall Street, a war against the limits of physics. To understand how a company that made graphics cards for video games ended up holding the keys to the artificial mind of God, we cannot start in the gleaming headquarters of Silicon Valley today. We have to go back to 1993, to a neighborhood in San Jose that the police didn't like to patrol. To a Denny's diner next to a freeway. The booth is red vinyl, cracked and peeling. The air smells of burnt coffee and grease. And 3 men are sitting there, sketching on a napkin, ignoring the bullet holes in the front window. Chris Malachowski, Curtis Preem, and a 30-year-old Taiwanese immigrant named Jensen Huang. The year is 1993. The internet is barely a concept. Windows 95 doesn't exist yet. And the computing world is ruled by a tyrant, the CPU. Intel is the king. The central processing unit is the brain of the computer, doing everything in a straight line. One task, then the next, then the next. It is serial, logical, and safe. But the 3 men at Denny's aren't interested in safe. They are obsessed with something the industry considers a niche toy, 3D graphics. They believe that the future of computing isn't about doing one hard math problem quickly. It's about doing millions of tiny, simple math problems all at the exact same time. They want to simulate reality. They want to build a chip that renders pixels. They scrape together $40,000. They incorporate. They need a name. They look through a Latin dictionary and find the word for envy, NVIDIA. They drop the first letter. NVIDIA is born. But the garage days were not romantic. They were a disaster. Their first chip, the NV1, was ambitious. It was designed to do everything: graphics, sound, controller ports. It was a multimedia monster. But it had a fatal flaw. It used a rendering technique called quadratic texture mapping. It was mathematically elegant, but it was weird. And then Microsoft dropped the hammer. They released DirectX. It was the standard that would define PC gaming for decades. And DirectX was built for triangles, polygons, not quadratic curves. Overnight, NVIDIA's technology was obsolete. The NV1 didn't just fail, it was incompatible with the future. By 1996, NVIDIA was a dead company walking. They had run out of money. They had 30 days of payroll left. The layoffs began. The dream was over.
This is the first crucible. This is the moment where 99% of founders quit. Jensen Huang had one card left to play, a contract with Sega. Sega was building the Dreamcast predecessor, and they had paid NVIDIA to design the chip. But Jensen knew the chip they were building was wrong. It would fail just like the NV1. He did the unthinkable. He walked into the office of the CEO of Sega, a man named Shoichiro Irimari, and said, "I cannot build this chip. It is the wrong technical direction. You should use a different partner. But if you don't pay me the full contract amount anyway, my company will go bankrupt." It was an absurd request. "I can't do the job, but please pay me." But Irimari saw something in Jensen. Maybe it was desperation, maybe it was genius. He convinced the board to invest $5 million. That $5 million was the lifeline. Jensen took it, scrapped everything, and moved the entire company to a new architecture, the Riva 128. He told his engineers, "We're 6 months from death. If this chip isn't perfect, we don't just lose a product, we lose our houses." They worked 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. And when the Riva 128 launched in 1997, it didn't just work, it flew. It was faster than anything on the market. It saved the company. But survival wasn't enough. Jensen wanted dominance. In 1999, they released the GeForce 256. This is a date that should be carved in stone, because this is when NVIDIA invented the term GPU, Graphics Processing Unit. Before this, you had a video card. Now you had a processor, a second brain. They marketed it brilliantly. They told gamers, the CPU is for the operating system, the GPU is for the soul of the game. NVIDIA entered the 2000s as a conqueror. They crushed their rivals. 3DFX, the company that invented the Voodoo card, the darling of the 90s, NVIDIA bought their bankrupt assets for pennies. They were the kings of the LAN party, the kings of Counter-Strike. But Jensen Huang was looking at the horizon, and he saw something that terrified him. He realized that if NVIDIA only made chips for video games, they would eventually hit a wall. There are only so many gamers. To become a giant, the GPU needed to be more than a toy. It needed to be a general-purpose computer. This brings us to 2006, the year NVIDIA made the bet that almost destroyed them for the second time. They introduced CUDA. To the average person, CUDA is a meaningless acronym, Compute Unified Device Architecture. But in the history of technology, CUDA is the Promethean moment. It was the fire. Before CUDA, if you wanted to use a graphics card to do math or science, you had to be a wizard. You had to trick the card into thinking your math equations were pixels and light beams. It was a hack. CUDA changed the rules. It was a software layer that allowed programmers to speak to the GPU in standard code, like C++. Suddenly, the massive parallel power of the graphics card was unlocked for physics, for oil exploration, for biology. But there was a catch. A massive, multi-billion-dollar catch. To make CUDA work, NVIDIA had to put the hardware logic into every single chip they made. Not just the $10,000 supercomputer cards, but the $100 card in a teenager's laptop playing World of Warcraft. This made the chips bigger, this made them hotter, this made them more expensive to manufacture, and for years, nobody used it. Wall Street lost its mind. Analysts screamed at Jensen during earnings calls. Why are you destroying your margins for a feature that 0.1% of your users care about? Gamers don't need scientific computing. Stay in your lane. The stock price flatlined. For 5 years, NVIDIA was seen as a company with a distracted CEO who was wasting money on a pipe dream. But Jensen held the line. He believed that if he built the platform, the innovators would come. He was building a cathedral in the desert, waiting for the congregation to arrive. And slowly, quietly, they did. In university basements and research labs, scientists realized that these gaming cards were actually budget supercomputers. If you couldn't afford a Cray supercomputer, you went to Best Buy, bought 4 NVIDIA cards, plugged them into a tower, and suddenly you had the power to simulate black holes. A cult formed, a cult of CUDA developers. And then, in 2012, the lightning struck. The location, the University of Toronto. The team, led by the legendary Geoffrey Hinton, the godfather of AI. For decades, artificial intelligence was a joke. It was the field of broken promises. Researchers had been trying to build neural networks, software that mimicked the human brain, but they failed. Neural networks require